This podcast explores the spiritual and metaphysical world through the experiences and opinions of the host and those interviewed, and therefore should not necessarily be seen as direct endorsement, medical or health advice, or personal advice to our listeners. We encourage you to use your own discretion, judgment, and intuition regarding anything you learn of through this show.
Greetings, metaphysicians. Our guest today is Rebecca Adams. Rebecca is a multi-dimensional creative and educator based in Samara, Costa Rica. She is founder of New Earth Education, whose self-mastery applied courses for children, adolescents, parents, and educators anchor remembrance of self-love and self-trust at school and at home. Rebecca is part of a paradigm shift in education whose mission is to support students in being themselves so they feel trusted, empowered, and inspired to bring their unique creativity to the table in response to the global call for help from Earth. Through engaging tools, techniques, songs, and symbolic games, the courses teach how the human being works and how to welcome in and work out the kinks as they show up to clear their channels and align with their intuitive compass. It's radical acceptance plus radical evolution equals radical authenticity. Our children were born for this and already know how. New Earth Ed helps them and us remember with a toolbox full that can be applied across a lifetime and shared with the whole family. On a personal note, I just have to share this story. When I met Rebecca Adams several months ago now, I just had such an interesting feeling in my heart and my soul that I marched right up to her after meeting her for the first time and we were leaving and said, "Excuse me, I mean this in the best possible way. You're an alien. Do you know what planet you're from?" And without missing a beat, Rebecca says, "The Pleiades." And then I add in, also without missing a beat, "Me too." This was my first encounter with Rebecca. She is a soul sister. We won't go into talking about planets and where we're from and where we've been before in this episode, but we will in later episodes, I'm sure. Please enjoy this talk, this conversation about New Earth education and what 5D education looks like and can look like in the future. Greetings, metaphysicians. Today I'm here with Rebecca Adams. Hello, Rebecca.
Hello. It is so wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. We are having this conversation from 2 different countries around the world. I am currently in Japan. Rebecca is in Costa Rica. And so this is a Facebook call. So I'm just going to say right away, if there's any sound issues, don't worry about it, everyone. We're doing the best that we can. So Rebecca, I start out this podcast the same every episode. Would you please share a metaphysical experience that you've had with us and our listeners?
Sure. I wanted to share one that relates specifically to why it is I think that I'm working with young people. It happened when I was in college, and I had spent the majority of my childhood feeling very protected, feeling very in contact and guided, really. It was good for my personal heart, but it was absolutely not something that I would share with anyone else. I journaled a lot, and a lot came through my journals. But when it came to interacting with my peers, I did a lot of hiding of what I actually thought and who I actually was, and had this really deep fear of being seen and being myself, which I've since learned is a deep cellular memory of persecution in my history. I received over the course of about a year these intuitive hits, those insights that come where the intuition just screams something clearly. I would hear them and they would kind of blow me away, but I would immediately stifle them. about a year into receiving these intuitive hits about how I just wasn't being true to myself, how I was following crowds the way that so many young people do in this deep desire to be accepted, I manifested what I could call a breakdown of when I had exited my habitual space where I was living. I had gone elsewhere in the state where I'm from North Carolina. All of a sudden, I tapped into a channel that I had never heard before, but that matched my frequency of deep fear. And it was around my life being in danger. And I was with a friend, and I've always found it hard to explain the clarity with which I was hearing these voices. It was totally unfamiliar to me because I hadn't ever really opened to other channels in a conscious way, though, as we know, we're always being bombarded by other people's agendas and their mental channels. But in this particular instance, I manifested this opportunity to see that I was in physical danger, though it was absolutely unmatching what was happening in the room, in the material realm. I was with a friend and having this completely other dimensional experience. It was frightening her, and we were sitting at a restaurant, and I put down money. We had just ordered, and I put down money, and I said, I'm sorry, we've got to go. I'm sorry, we've got to go. Because the extent to which the threats were showing themselves were beyond the capacity for me to stifle any longer. I had totally tapped into my limbic system, my fight or flight response, but I was also having a very present moment mental experience with the reasonable fear. We put down money, and I left, and I'll never forget, there was a mirror behind the cashier as we were walking out, and I turned and I caught my eyes in the mirror, and I had this experience of deep yes, because it was the first time that I had gone so far against the current to trust myself that I crossed a threshold in that moment. The density of hiding that I had been doing and not listening to myself, the stifling that I had been doing, was burst through in that moment. There was this sense of, yes, I trust you. I left the restaurant and walked into this clear blue sky in front of me. And I had what I can only describe as an epiphany, in which all of the puzzle pieces that I had had over the past year came together, and all of a sudden in front of my eyes, I was watching a movie of who I am, watching a movie of why I'm here, all in perfect order. I had seen everything that I was seeing before, and my heart had a heart attack, an explosion and opening of my fourth chakra that was concurrent with watching a movie of all of these moments in which my intuition, in which my higher knowing and my clairvoyance had brought forth a message that I had refused. It all came back in order.
Wow.
And I exploded in my heart and proceeded, of course, over the course of the next 2 hours to sob uncontrollably, and my beloved sweet friend had no idea what was happening, and I had no idea what was happening. But it was the moment in which and it's taken years to come to reflect and to really own the story, because again, this deep fear of being seen has been a personal project of resonating out in my body and clearing those pathways. It's when I recognized the power of our human primate to protect us and to desire our survival and our acceptance, and also the power of ourselves to give ourselves and to be open to really high quality information when we are able to receive it. My work is in supporting this critical mass of consciousness. And I've learned that the critical mass I always thought was more people, but I'm realizing that it's mass in the form of density. I somehow at that moment, because I feared for my physical survival based on a real time event, I blew myself out of my own way to such an extent that my vibration raised and the mass became less dense. That really changed how I approach life, that it is density and everything is the way that it is. We are a human primate. We are an emotional map that is projecting itself like a pinball machine of consciousness, refracting haphazardly when we're still blocked. We are astral influence. We are familial ancestral influence. We are all of these things, and that is our form. That is the way that we are informed, and that density is. And that's okay. So there's this radical acceptance for this sweet child who wanted to be accepted, and this old seer who didn't want to be killed. There is this brilliant fractal and highly specialized consciousness and energy signature that we also each are. And we're learning how to integrate those two. And it doesn't mean a negation of anything. It's absolutely an integration between those two things.
I love this story. This is bringing up a lot of things for me, and I want to ask you a few questions about that, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Thank you for creating a safe space for me to share it.
Of course. Really, I'm just hoping that I can remember everything that I wanted to ask about and bring up. One is just about the story itself. Did you find that you actually were in 3D Earth world physical danger, or was that coming in so that you could have that experience?
That is a great question. There was absolutely no danger. And of course, this is how the limbic system operates, right? It continues to tell us that we're in danger. Even when the sympathetic nervous system is activated, its fight or flight response, it tells us that we're in the same kind of danger when we're coming to an intersection that it tells us when there's a jaguar chasing us. There was such a massive response. The difference in this, and this happens to us all the time, we're constantly moving in and out of sympathetic to parasympathetic response, and building a fluidity and a resiliency and flexibility is part of the work of taming this human being, this primate that we are. And also the way that it was a little bit different from the way that it usually shows up is that the issue, the trigger, was not an external. Usually the trigger is some form of external thing or even a thought pattern that we had. I tuned into a channel of an absolute conversation that was happening, manifested, I don't know whether from my own consciousness or whether this was some other dimensional, which I expect that it was because the clarity and the longevity of this conversation. I sat here and listened to this plot to murder us. It was crazy.
Oh, that's what you were hearing. Okay.
I mean, to the point that I asked the people at the table next to us if they were talking about us. I went elsewhere because, and I believe in reflecting, and I could be wrong, I believe that I really had arrived at a point at which my self was no longer willing to be silenced. We have this incredible capacity to manifest all kinds of dis-ease within our beings, our mental, our emotional, and our physical beings, in order to show us that something is dissonant with harmony and with being consciousness creating.
Mm-hmm.
I needed that last piece to take a radical act of courage, vibrate me. It's interesting that on an emotional map, when you look at the frequencies, courage is right under neutrality. It's around 200 hertz. Given that this is vibration of the universe, when you're in those denser thought patterns of shame, fear, and guilt, you're looking outside of yourself for support and you're not trusting yourself. Once you reach that threshold of courage and the neutrality, which is trust, you begin to liberate yourself and move with power and less with forcefulness.
Wow. There's so many things I'm really glad that you brought up and that I want to touch on, because I think it's important for a lot of our listeners possibly too. The first thing that you kind of mentioned while going into this was you said something about having a cellular memory of being persecuted for what you knew.
Yes.
I think that I know that this is something that I've experienced. I feel like I've heard this. I know that I've heard this through a lot of other types of light workers and a lot of other folks who have come to the planet to share and to teach and to help raise the vibration of the planet, or just be and do whatever they came here to do. But there's that memory that lives somewhere of having been persecuted for the knowledge that you carry. And
yes,
it's definitely something that I've felt before. In your life, you were saying it's been there forever. You were conscious of it and consciously not speaking your mind and being authentic and sharing your truth. For me, I started to experience this later in my life when I was more and more connected to my spirituality. And when I started to become more aware of the unseen world around us and my own spirituality and connect more with my guidance. And at that point, that is when I felt like I had to be careful about who I was talking about what with, if that makes sense.
yes,
I felt like I had to, and luckily it was only a couple of years while I was really getting into where I am now and hopefully where I'm going. But I definitely censored myself about what my experiences were. And I hear you saying that, and it occurs to me that this is probably a very common experience.
I think that the hermit archetype is something that's just super present. The more you start tapping into connectivity with your multidimensional being, the more difficult it is to relate on third dimensional plane.
Mm-hmm.
When you were talking about the fear to just be, I mean, that is the collective habit that has been built over decades.
What is decades?
By decades, I mean eons.
Right.
This is the thing. When you asked about a metaphysical experience, I think more these days in the present tense, now that I've moved beyond this, it's my singing. I channel a song and I have the experience of feeling myself being sung to through me, as me. I'm receiving. I'm a receiver. Code. I used to be terrified to sing anywhere except at church. Then later on in the yoga classes that I would teach. But having to censor really brings up the prevalence of the fear vibration and how magnetic it is. This is part of the personal work that we're doing, and part of the light work that we're doing is really engaging in this battle.
Right.
And it's an inner battle. It's an inner battle of holding the frequency and choosing not to resonate with the fear that the majority is vibrating accidentally as their majority investor. You protecting yourself is you got to. Why would you choose to work so much harder just to maintain your trust in yourself?
Right. And it's that famous cliche, which happens to be true, is that we get to do the internal work and then see the external results in the world.
That's the being as to. I love that part of this paradigm shift, and part of why I'm so excited to be part of the education and 5D movement, is that it is a remembrance and a reclaiming of being as the primary intention and objective in education. And then doing is the byproduct that comes from that consciousness, creating of its own highly specialized volition through an individual fractal that is a person. It's about being first and really correcting the misunderstanding that we have to produce to have worth.
Right. Right.
And we have to produce something very specific that doesn't make people uncomfortable.
Right.
Or else we'll be burned for it.
Well, from that, let's move into talking more about the topic of the show today, which is 5D next level education. I think we're focusing mostly on for youth and adolescents, but we can talk about anywhere that feels good. I also just want to note for the audience, Rebecca is in Costa Rica and there is a dog barking, and that's where we're at right now. Sorry about that noise. It is what it is. So Rebecca, can you tell us about a little bit about your history with education and where you're at with it now and what's important to you?
Sure, great. I am from a family of educators, so I really grew up with my parents embodying the educator in a way that was really supportive for me. After graduating from college, I came down to Costa Rica and lived for a year in India teaching English, and then made my way over to California, where I worked for a few years in the Oakland Unified School District's Office of Charter Schools, then transitioned into a really progressive project that my mentor and boss was offering for the district, which is the community schools quality education project, making the schools the centerpiece again of the community and offering what is needed in the community at the school level. So expanding the vision of what is a community school to support the holistic needs of the community. Also, in my experience with the Office of Charter Schools, though we were from the authorizing body perspective, I really got an opportunity to see the myriad of ways in which educators were creatively intending to teach concepts that were outside of the traditional system, while still meeting the limiting needs of standardized testing at the end. They were liberating themselves and their students a little bit from the input-driven educational system, which, because of property taxes paying for the amount of supports that the schools are going to get, is stripping kids of quality resources in the absence of financial resources. In the same way, that's one of the issues with charter schools, and that I won't get into right now. It's got this dual-edged sword of being a liberating conduit for a child's mind, but also a really restricting conduit for the traditional schools that are losing funding as a result of kids coming to charter because money follows children. So I had some really great experience from behind the scenes. I transitioned into, as I was developing in my own spiritual practice, I moved over to begin teaching yoga and managing a yoga studio part-time while working in the school district part-time in that office of quality school development. I got this amazing opportunity to be part of a Stanford research study in which they were testing the effects of a weekly yoga and mindfulness, they called it a health and wellness program, on the cortisol stress levels of youth in a high trauma school district, East Palo Alto. The whole school district, the K-8, pre-K-8 school district, is getting health and wellness twice a week. And it was a longitudinal study to test the effects of these practices in balancing out the effects of stress. The district is something like 45% homeless when you consider people living in garages and two families living in one home. My school was half a block down the road from Facebook's headquarters, and so rent prices were skyrocketing. This is one of the byproducts of the tech boom.
Wow.
Valley it's absolutely displacing entire communities.
Right.
This is already a community that had been through a lot in the 90s, and then the demographic had shifted to about 90% Hispanic, had about, I don't remember the demographics. I believe it was about 80% Hispanic, 10% African American, 10% Pacific Islander. These are communities that have been totally displaced. So what we found in the study was that initial results showed that there was, over the course of 3 years, marked effects on the sleep habits, more sleep for these kids, and a lowering of the stress levels, cortisol levels in the kids.
Wow.
So that really inspired and in addition, it introduced me to 350 kids who were light.
Mm-hmm.
And trapped light is what I would call it. Deeply programmed beliefs, deeply impressed emotional bodies, etheric bodies with these impressions of traumatic experiences over sometimes small experiences, but over a sustained amount of time. And the brilliance was absolutely apparent. The trappings were also absolutely apparent. And I got the opportunity to see the effects of tools and techniques that are mindfulness-based, awareness-based, self-development-based, as a means of beginning to clear the channels. When I moved to Costa Rica, I got an opportunity to teach in a couple places. The two main projects that I've been involved in here were really interesting duo, because in one case I was working with largely locals, seeing their programs, seeing the way in which they were inside of a box. Now these are kids, these are littles, preschool age. I was more working with kindergarten through 8th grade back in California. But here, once I got to the younger kids, I started seeing over the course of time with them a more rapid development of themselves and their interests. And I also started seeing manifestations of the ways in which the societal and the familial and the cultural programs were starting to groove their way into their neural pathways, and they were developing habits that were largely the product of their environment and not their authentic, free beings, which I also had the opportunity and real blessing of getting to know at the beginning. So my work became to help them stay free as much as possible and teach them tools and songs and activations to help them remember that they are unique and that they are worthy. These are things that children come into the world having. And then over the course of time, in these densities of these lower dimensional realms, we start to take on impressions in addition to the ones that we already brought with us in this body. So, counter to that, I had the opportunity to work with a group of students from families who were very spiritually connected and remembered and committed to the sovereignty of their children, the freedom of the light being that had come into a body. I had the experience of seeing what it looks like and feels like and what information comes through when a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old has been protected, we could say, and held as sovereign in as many ways as possible, and also really cared for on a nutritional level and such things. What the experience taught me was that in that freedom work, there was a real lack of integration. There was a real disconnect between the sovereign child and the human form that this being was now inhabiting. And there was a disconnect between self and others, as you would expect when a being is coming down and learning how to be in relationship with others. There's a lot of work to be done there in all of the processes that are part of this human being. So for the free ones, it was a process of integration into the human, emotional, mental, physical being, sharing space and being considerate of other beings, including Gaia. And then for these locals, it was an experience of liberating the mind, shedding the programs as quickly as we could find them, right? Of, do you believe that? Is that yours? Who said that? Who said that through you?
Mm-hmm. You know, identifying where they came from.
Yeah, and what feels good? Does that feel good to think? And does that, and really reintroducing them to their sovereign birthright to feel good and to feel true and authentic. Through these two really incredible experiences, I got to see the two sides, find myself placed in a role where, as a balancing educator, I was getting to handle both sides, utilize my experience in both rights, and bring this real infinity symbol of nurturing the gifts and the sovereign being, and also integrating balance and connection on a human level, connection with self and connection with each other.
Wow. That's a really useful and unique experience. I just want to take a minute for our audience too. I think you and I, we may use terminology that listeners may not be used to using. in terms of education and multidimensionality, etc. So I just wanted to talk about that for a second. So when we're talking about programming and children being programmed or people being programmed through their parents and their culture, talking about belief systems, and we're talking about what else goes into that, societal rules and norms and cultural rules and norms. And of course, we all have this depending on where we're from in the world and in the country, and the norms and the rules and the belief systems that go into creating or helping to shape who somebody is. And what we're talking about here is that through the education system, we kind of, depending on the education system itself, we do that more, right? We add to the familial and the cultural programming, and we put in educational programming.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for speaking to this. Talk about programs. I talk about belief systems that we, yes, absolutely share that help us develop our sense of self, our sense of identity, as a part of a family unit, as part of cultural unit, national unit, all of these ways that really help us feel this sense of belonging. This is not to be shed completely. The consideration and thing to keep in mind as an educator and as a parent who's embodying the educator and as a person in general when we're in relationship is that we must be very careful to be very aware of what our beliefs are and respect first and foremost the primary remembrance of education in 5D as far as I am concerned, as a real truth for me, is that we respect each being as sovereign in a free will universe, and that gives them the right to choose and the reality that in each moment they are choosing for themselves what they are thinking, what they're believing, and what they are creating, they're doing. That is the nature of the universe. We are always choosing. As we grow, we take on, due to our surroundings and our past life experience, the impressions that have been made that were impressionable for us. We begin our choices and our creations from those neural pathways. Our brains literally form grooves. The more we think of thought, the groove gets deeper and deeper and deeper and wider until it's a highway. It's a habit of thought. And when those are coming from the outside, they are being put onto a child or a person without necessarily the permission of the child. Now, of course, children don't know so much. And so there are certain things that we're helping them. Our role is to help them navigate these material realms. Outside of that, there is no reason to project something of your belief that, unless it is directly applicable to the moment and to the lesson that they are learning, that they can immediately use and apply to learn. And if there is something that's coming through you, it's absolutely important to share. This is my belief. This is what I think. It's important that the languaging that we use to make sure that it stays personal as opposed to the shoulds. We have vibrated out of the shoulds.
Mm-hmm.
We're out of that. We can use languaging such as, if I would do this if I could. Can I? Oh, I can, so I will. What would you do knowing that these are the rules of the playing field? This is what we've got right now. And this is how this thing moves, and this is how this thing's nature is. And education is more about orienting the child to the material realms and then sitting back and listening to what programs they're already running, because they do have their own programs that are their guidance. And they may have their own programs that are their deep impressions or something that they've picked up, or that's coming from an ancestral wound or unresolved aspect, or coming from a past life imprint, just listening to what they would do. So it becomes this collective petri dish in which each person is looking at themselves and what's coming through and being like, whoa, this is what I do, and this is what I believe, and this is what I think, and having a conversation and seeing it more through the eyes of a scientist than through the eyes of a dogmatic guy. We know some things that they don't know, because when we come into the body, we forget a lot. And more than not, especially when we're working with kids at a young age, there's not so much that they're ready to receive and give permission to consider until a later age. So, circling back to the programming, programs are thoughts, their beliefs, their patterns. They are these neural pathways in our brain, in our physical brain, that we have developed over the course of thinking that for a long time. We either think it because it's told to us, or we feel something and it triggers a thought, and we rethink the thought, which then rethinks the feeling, which re-establishes the feeling and amplifies those magnetics. So we are this complex and yet very simple system of circuitry and of channels that is very physically impressionable in helping a child stay sovereign, or helping a child remember that they are sovereign, so that they may move forward in an authentic way. We have to be careful that we're not loading something that's not theirs, which is to say that it's ours.
Right.
Now this comes back to the essence, which is self-love and self-trust. It's incredible that we as a society don't focus on that we've forgotten that that's how prevalent this fear matrix is, that self-trust and self-love are not the foundation of any educational program, right? So
right, they're not.
Education and education in 5D is a concept, and New Earth Education, which is the project that I'm working on, teaches tools that normalize this radical evolution, rewiring of these neural pathways, this neuroplasticity, this changing of habits, teaching tools to radically evolve our being based on the foundation of self-trust and self-love, so that the functions of their vessel, that the way that they operate, this human primate who's wired to survive, can more fluidly align with the individual child's intuitive compass. And if there is not a solid understanding as a foundation and a base remembrance that self-love and self-trust are your birthright, and that you are worthy and trustworthy and brilliantly unique, with a unique light signature and a whole bunch of things that nobody else could possibly understand, and that it will take you a while to remember how to understand. We're not educating a sovereign being. We are feeding fear, because if you can't look inside of yourself and you can't trust yourself, and there's no real stability coming from outside, it's another generation lost.
This is a topic that is just really near and dear to my heart. particularly because of my education when I was younger. My first educational experience was Montessori school, which is out of the box, not so far off from a Waldorf kind of education. And then after that, I was put into Catholic school. And then after that, I begged to be put into public school. The differences in the education systems that I was open to when I was a child are very different. I always kind of held up Montessori as being the best type of school that I've ever been to and kind of credit it for making me who I am today. And I still do that. But even looking back in Montessori, which I love and cherish, there wasn't a specific course of study or the way that they taught things that connected you to yourself and to your self-love and your self-worth specifically and overtly. I think that happens more as a product of the way that they educate there, but it wasn't specifically overt. And I think the way that you are advocating for. And that's really interesting to me because we don't really have a widespread, because certainly Montessori school and Waldorf are not widespread. They're all over the world, but in not a huge way. We don't have a system that teaches trust in our own intuition.
Can you believe it?
No, like now that being where I am now, it's like, wait, we don't even teach people to trust themselves. We don't teach people to love themselves.
How.
Right.
That's because we've forgotten, and fear is real. This beautiful thing about New Earth education, it's not a system. I call it a crystalline overlay or underlay in which these concepts, these remembrances, it's a remembrance. The remembrance that it's okay to be before you do. The remembrance of how to be before you do. The remembrance of self-love and self-trust and free will and choice and the responsibility for intentional choice, or if you're not in a space to create from a frequency of love or above, that it's time to tend and befriend, right, in that moment, and teaching those tools and songs and remembrances. These are also programs. These are things that get stuck in one's mind. They are geared towards that remembrance, and it really has to do with the being over the doing. Most of our educational systems have a lot to do with how to do things and what to do,
right,
and what to think, which is a doing. And none of them is innately wrong. None of them is inherently perfect. They do all, and I would say that Waldorf is the closest that comes to this remembrance of the being before the doing. Though I would say that it's a little bit out of balance in that marriage of being and doing, of consciousness, creative. This can work with any system. It's not a curriculum, though the programs and the courses that I offer are a particular self-development, self-mastery applied course. But education in 5D is that crystalline overlay of remembrance, of self-worth, and of self-trust. And it's a reclaiming of higher frequencies that help us entrain ourselves to the higher frequencies of courage, love, and gratitude, and reverence, and peace, which comes a lot more with being than doing. And from that higher vibrational field, then engaging our human, which includes our etheric imprints, these emotional body or life force body that has these impressions, which are continuing to project and project and project until we find where we've had this block and begin to smooth it out. These are all just parts of being. This is what it means to be human. It means to have a brain that is neuroplastic. It means to have an etheric body that is highly impressionable. It means to have a physical body that is manifesting what's happening on the more subtle realms. It is all of these things, and when we start to see it as scientists and say, oh, my person is doing this, and we also have a nature, we have personality, and when we can mature and channel that with the olders, with the adolescents, once we get into who we are as a nature and a personality, we begin to find the aspects that are just our strong suits that make us feel really powerful and empowered, and we see and radically accept all of the parts of what's up for us and who we are and what we've got currently operating, and we upgrade the system by refining our nature and releasing what no longer serves in terms of our impressions, our imprints. There are tools for all of this. So it's a whole toolkit of remembrances that we are both unique light signatures of consciousness creating, and we are these vessels that have all of these pathways that have been built over our life and lifetimes, generations, and that are continuing to run that circuitry until we spot it and we capture it and we say, wow, cool, there you are, hi. And we start to engage it with radical acceptance, and then we begin to engage it with radical mastery of radical evolution. And we start to say, hey, brain, it's okay, I see you and I love you, and that's okay if this belief exists, but it doesn't feel true, it doesn't feel good, it doesn't feel authentic, and I deserve to feel true and good and authentic. So I'm going to divest totally from you, and I'm going to retrain and change the physical structure of my brain and hijack my own trappings and become masterfully me, so that I can be accessible and available to my own channels, and I can watch consciousness create through me as me in response to the creative impulse of life, of consciousness moving through us, and address the serious issues that face our planet at this time from a completely authentic lens. And that's part of the role of the educator and the parent, is to really surrender to education is setting them up to be who they are and then letting go completely. And we don't know where we're going. And we can tell we don't know where we're going because of what we've been creating. And what we've been creating is not born of love. So we are helping them stay and regain and retain and train this vessel that is free and clear and upright and sovereign and will choose wisely because they are trustworthy.
Well, sign me up for that kind of education. Wow. I love what you've been saying. And I think that this has been a really good introduction to what education can look like and is hopefully going to move towards for the next generations. But talking about what you would like to move into, I think for the purposes of this episode, we'll leave it there for this episode's discussion. But I would like to continue with you in a moment to continue that discussion, maybe for some bonus content about how you're working with that now. Is that okay?
Great. Absolutely. I'm in.
Awesome. Well, then we'll just say goodbye to our listeners for now. Thank you, Rebecca, so much for having this conversation with me.
It's a pleasure. It's a delight. Thank you.
Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Rebecca. I sure did. We actually have a bit more of the conversation that we are putting into our bonus content, and that is talking specifically about what Rebecca is working on now, and also where she sees 5D New Earth Ed going in the future. So please, if you would like to listen to that bonus segment, you can listen to this bonus content at www.patreon.com/letsgetmeta. Thank you for joining. Stay meta.